Today, we speak with author M.F. Gross about his new book called Madman, about a violent moment in Crystal Beach, Florida from 1949, where John Calvin Rastus Russell committed murder. Lance, what'd you think of this conversation?
I think our guest, M.F. Gross, is the exact person to depict this incredible crime, this incredibly brutal crime that happened in the 40s. As you know, we love our historic crimes here, and M.F. Gross, this is the first book that he's written in the true crime genre, really knocks it out of the park. He has some interesting theories about how he thinks everything went down, which is appreciated to hear some theorizing from somebody who is from the area, who talked to the locals, talked to family members, and came away connecting some dots on his own. What did you think?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting story. I think it's very tragic, and it really kind of resonated and lasted for a while in this story because there was a manhunt after the murder. So it's really quite a wild story.
And we do leave it at a bit of a cliffhanger, but rest assured, M.F. Gross does not leave his book Madman in a similar fashion. We just didn't want to give too much away, so I think everyone's going to enjoy this conversation, and if you want to find out more about Mr. Gross, you can go to his website, mfgross.com, and right there you can buy the book.
Okay, so check out his website, MF Gross, and pick up a copy of Madman. But first, please follow us on social media at Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod.
All right, we're going to break real quick for commercial, and we will be right back with MF Gross to talk about Rastus Russell, the Madman.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Welcome to the podcast, MF Gross. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Tim.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Can you just introduce yourself and let everyone know a little bit about MF Gross?
Sure, I'd be glad to, Lance. Yeah, my name's MF Gross. That's my author name. My real name is Michael. I spent 22 years in the financial industry, and a few years ago I retired, and I never set out to be a true crime writer. I just happened to stumble across this story that happened in my own neighborhood 75 years ago. The more I dug into it, the more fascinated I became with it. I ended up going down the rabbit hole, and the more I learned about it, I said, oh, this sounds like a movie. I said, first let's start with a book, because I'd done a lot of writing in the past professionally. I thought I'd give it a try, and it turned out well, I think.
The title is just so apt. It's so perfect for this. It's called Madman. Did you ever have another idea for a title?
Well, I played around with some titles, but yeah, this one really struck me. And the newspapers at the time, they referred to him a couple of times as the Madman. There was a magazine article called The Madman of Crystal Beach. Yeah, once I just came to that one-word title, I thought that captured it all.
Yeah, it definitely seems to. So who is your book about?
My book is about a fascinating character by the name of John Calvin Russell. His nickname was Rastus Russell, and that's what everyone knew him by. So as the legend goes down, it's the legend of Rastus Russell. And he was at the time, 34-year-old drifter, local troublemaker, been in and out of jail. He'd been in and out of mental institutions. He had trouble with the law, but it was mostly things like car theft and burglary, assault, at least as far as we know. He'd never been a gruesome murderer before this. In fact, a lot of people knew him in town. He didn't set out to be a murderer. It just kind of ended up that way.
And how did you come across this story?
I happened to pick up a book. It was just a local book put out in our neighborhood, and it was written by our older residents there that had grown up in Crystal Beach, Florida, which is where this is set and takes place. And they talked a lot about their life growing up in this little idyllic beach community in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And there was a lot of stories about family picnics and playing on the water and fishing and scalloping and all these things. But amongst those stories, I came across one of a much darker nature, and it was this story of this horrific murder that had occurred there in 1949. It had scarred everyone. All of the people that I interviewed that were alive then, most of them were children, to a person, they remembered it as this terrifying, horrific event from their childhood. And it scared everyone. He was just like the Freddy Krueger of his time, except for real. When I read this story, it just became a fascination for me, and I started to pursue it from there.
This is such a historic story. How did you figure out like where to start? So this took place in 1949, correct? So where do you start on something like that? Because there's so much history that you could be including in there, you know, to kind of set the time and the place. Was that like a daunting task for you?
It wasn't daunting, but yes, that's a great question, because I had never researched a book like this before. Now, I had done research in the financial industry, so I had some idea of the basics, but I had no idea how to research a true crime book. But I started pulling up old newspaper archives, and that was my starting point, and I kind of built out from there. So from there, I expanded to looking to pull up old court records, old police records, which were kind of scarce for going that far, but we were able to find some things. I hired a couple of private detectives, and they began to track down some of the descendants. I started to interview people on my own, just from the local neighborhood and word of mouth. I got introduced to people that had been alive then. And it just kind of went from there. We got into Ancestry.com, did a lot of searches on real estate records and things like that. So it's really multi-channel, where you're pulling information from all these different sources, and then you're trying to lay it all out and seeing where all the pieces fit together. And there was a lot of blanks that needed filled in that may not be filled in one particular spot, like the newspaper. But when you pull all those other pieces together, you start to have some aha moments. The best part for me was that I live here, so I could actually go visit these locations now, reading, knowing what happened, and then look around and try and piece together, why did he do this? Why would he go that way? Why? And it makes a lot more sense when you're standing there on the spot and you feel it too. And that was the best part for me, is actually being there on the locations.
Cool. Yeah, that definitely makes a difference when reporting on stories from the past. Can you tell us a little bit about what Crystal Beach was like at the time, and then now as well?
Sure. In 1949, Crystal Beach was a very tight-knit, small, close community. Everybody knew each other. There was virtually no crime at all. I mean, this was a place where you had a lot of well-to-do people from up north that would come down and spend winters and then go back up. But there was a good population of locals that lived here year-round as well. But the biggest crime here was, somebody had a little too much to drink on a Friday night, or somebody's cat got stuck in a tree. But crime in Crystal Beach was virtually unheard of. So this happening there, I described it as Charles Manson comes to Mayberry, because that's exactly what it was. And that's that contrast is one of the scariest parts. And I think that's what affected people so much as well. As far as what Crystal Beach is like today, happily, Crystal Beach retains a lot of its old character. It's one of the few places in Florida you can go that really retains a lot of that old Florida feel. Yes, there are some new houses there. There's some edges of it. They've built some developments. But the core of Crystal Beach, a lot of the houses there were the same houses there in 1949. So there's still a lot of history there, and the feel of it is still this small, tight-knit beach community.
Okay, can you take us back there? Can you take us to Rastus Russell, and how does he even connect to this community?
Rastus Russell grew up right outside Crystal Beach. The kind of surrounding community is Palm Harbor. Crystal Beach is kind of just like a little corner of Palm Harbor. So Russell's very familiar with it. Rastus Russell had been to the Browns' home 3 months before this happened. Why he was there is a very gray area. Mrs. Browne, who survived the attack, the victim's name was Norman Browne. His wife is is Ann Browne. So they're an older couple. They're retirees. They're living in Crystal Beach in a very kind of secluded corner of Crystal Beach in the woods. And Rastus Russell ends up at their house on this Sunday morning. They know him. They invite him inside. He sits in their kitchen and they have coffee and talk for 3.5 hours before Russell finally gets irritated with something. He grabs Mr. Browne's shotgun. He turns it on him. And that's how the whole string of events begins. How he comes to be there, Mrs. Browne changes her story 3 times. She says he was at the house 3 months prior. First, she says he was there to repair a water pump. And then she says his car ran out of water. He needed to put water in it. And then she says, oh, no, he stopped by because the house was for sale and he wanted to look at the house. So she gives 3 different reasons why he was there 3 months earlier. So 3 months later, he shows up. They know him. And supposedly they invite him in because he says he's there. He has somebody interested in buying their house. And they talk for 3.5 hours. After this event occurs and they ask Mrs. Browne what his name is, she says, I don't know his name. So he's been at their house 3 months earlier. They just spent 3.5 hours with him in the kitchen, and she never thought to ask his name. The newspaper at the time reported this as a random murder. Through my investigation, I am convinced this was not a random murder. This was not a random act. These people were connected somehow.
And who was she giving the statements to? Was this something that she told the police and then reporters picked up on it? Or was it directly to reporters? Or was it like friends to reporters or something?
She did give an interview to the newspaper afterwards. So this is from both. This is from what she tells police and then what she tells newspapers afterwards. And that's part of the place where her story changes. Yeah, it's from multiple sources that she's given this information.
So 2 of those stories, she says, mentioned something about water. One with the water pump in his car, and one, what was it about water, the first one?
She said he was there to repair their well out back. And he was a well repairman. That was the first story she gave. And then when police investigated at the time, they found out he was never a well repairman, nor he ever worked for any well repair companies. It sounds like that had something to do with her changing her story, but I don't know. It doesn't say why she changed her story, but I saw that she changed her story 3 times.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I wondered if maybe it was misreporting back in the day, if 2 are somewhat similar. I don't know. We cover a lot of stories where there's just a lot of stuff that gets misreported and then is reported as fact later. That's weird. So he wasn't ever a well repairman at all?
No, never.
And the house was on sale when he came, when the violence happened?
The house was for sale, yes.
Okay, interesting.
Yes. But that's a good point you bring up. At the time, especially in the 1940s, if you go back and read news articles from that time, there was a different style of journalism. It was very dramatic. It was very almost creating an entertainment. I mean, it was very graphic. And they really, I don't want to say they hyped it up, but they really made it dramatic. So it's entertaining reading. Some of the time you get the feel that in a rush to get the story out, they may have filled in some blanks because you'll see some things from the initial reporting and then you read the police version later and it's different. So that was one of the places where I had to try and piece things together using some deductive reasoning.
Interesting. So was Rastus ever involved in any sort of illicit activity as far as like drug dealing or anything like that?
You know, the initial theory was he tells them when he first pulls a shotgun on them that he's a member of a gang from Chicago. If they do anything, his gang buddies are going to come down here and take care of them if they don't listen to him. He did spend some time in Chicago. He has an uncle that works for the city of Chicago. He actually spent 7 years in the Chicago area. He claims he shot 3 policemen in Chicago. We could find no record of that. The police at the time don't seem to have any record of it either because there's never any more mention of that other than his claims of that. So was he part of a drug gang? Probably not. That wasn't really his forte. He was more of a thief. He did get arrested up in Illinois for car theft, and he did some time up there for that. But his bread and butter was burglary and car theft.
Interesting. It's such a huge leap from car theft to, double murder, attempted double murder, I guess. Just the brutality involved seems like a huge leap there. Norman was 75.
Yeah, Norman was 75. So Rastus was 34.
Right. So that feels like a big disadvantage unless Norman is like a very fit 75-year-old.
Yeah, no, it was a big disadvantage. Not to mention that Rastus Russell was a very muscular man, especially for the time. Going to the gym, it wasn't like today where there's a gym on every corner. I mean, there was some guys that did it, but it wasn't like a mainstream thing like it is now. He wasn't that tall, but he was very muscular. He was very good looking, known to have a charismatic personality, but he also seemed to have a violent streak. He'd been arrested many times on assault, attempted murder. Psychologists determined later, at least what the mainstream thinking is he had what's called a Jekyll-Hyde personality, where he could be normal most of the time, and then something could flip a switch in his brain and he would become this violent person capable of anything. And I think he was in a situation where that clicked, and it was more the situation that determined what he did. He didn't go there to plan actually it was a quadruple attempted murder. It just happened to unfold that way.
Yeah, the reason why I was asking about the age, just to confirm, is that him being muscular younger by like 40-ish years and spending so much time with them, like 3.5 hours, I'm just wondering, like, what was it that triggered him? That he didn't think that, unless he just went into this blind rage, but there was something in there that triggered him that was so egregious that he needed to get a weapon instead of using his own physical capabilities.
Well, yeah, now you're kind of getting into the conspiracy part of this story. One of the biggest mysteries here is, why was he there? And he was there for money. According to Miss Browne, the whole time he was demanding money. They're saying, look, we don't have any money. We don't even have a car. The only survivor of this, at least this initial part, is Mrs. Browne. He killed Norman Browne very brutally, if you read the book. So everything we have to go on is Anne Brown's account. The story at the time wasn't in the papers, but what I got from the locals was that the Browns owed a debt. Russell was there to collect a debt. I ended up interviewing a person that not only knew Rastus Russell, but lived in the house with him at the time of the murders. So this guy was like a linchpin to my whole book. Russell lived with a family close by in Palm Harbor. He rented a room in their house. This gentleman, he's almost 90 now, but he was a 12-year-old boy at the time. He told me his father told him the Browns owned some kind of jewelry store up in New York, or were involved in some type of jewelry store up in New York. And they had hired Russell to rob the jewelry store, bring them the jewels. They would get the insurance money and then sell the jewels, I guess, on the black market or wherever. So Russell did his part. He robbed the store, he brought him the jewels, and they're waiting on the insurance money. And when Russell showed up to get it, they didn't have it for some reason, or either that or they wouldn't give it to him. And that is my theory in the book, that he is there that Sunday morning to collect a debt. And that 3.5 hours is a negotiation. And at the end, it doesn't go his way. And that's when things go south really quick.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
What did Anne say that they talked about for that long? Because that's a long time to talk.
That's a very long time. And the only thing she said was, we talked about all manner of things. She said he was there to look at the house. He had friends coming down that wanted to buy the house, and that's what they were talking about. And one report said he told them his friends were coming that day and he was waiting for them. Anne didn't say anything about that. But at one point, he supposedly leaves with Norman Browne and drives him to get a newspaper. And then they come back to the house and they sit again. There's just so many things in the story that don't add up. One of my theories was, and it's only a theory, which I had many, but I didn't put them in the book. I tried to stick to facts, except when I specifically stated this is my theory. My theory is they didn't leave to get a newspaper. Maybe he had jewels somewhere else. Maybe he had money somewhere else, and that's what they went to get. And maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe it wasn't what they agreed to, and that's where the argument started. It's hard to say. But what is true is he ties Norman and Anne Browne up to their beds, and what unfolds is just this horrific torture session where he's cutting them with knives and pounding on them with the butt of a shotgun and just brutalizing them until they tell him where the money is. And they apparently don't, because in the end, he loses his temper and just ends up cutting Norman Browne horribly.
When he has the choice to use the shotgun or a knife to end someone's life, that's so much more personal than what he could have just simply done if he wanted to end the situation and get out of there. What's your take on that? Like, was he that far in rage that it didn't matter at that point?
Yeah, what seems like happened was he brought the shotgun. He starts out grabbing Norman's shotgun, which Norman lives in the woods. There's rattlesnakes around. Norman keeps a shotgun for wildlife and snakes and everything else. He goes in the bathroom. There's the shotgun. So he grabs Norman's shotgun, holds that on him. That's how the situation starts. He locks them in the barn, and then he ties them up in the shed, and then he leaves, and he's gone for an hour and a half. Another strange part of the story. And then he comes back, and when he comes back, he has his own shotgun, which is a sawed-off shotgun. And he's using that more to threaten them and march them around, but he does also use it as a club, so he's hitting them with it. But once he ties them up, he's trying to get them to talk, so he doesn't want to kill them. He wants to cause them pain. He wants to cut them until they tell him where the money is. So he's jabbing Norman in all parts of his body. Where's the money? Where's the money? Where's the money? And he's doing it to Anne too, but not as he doesn't really do much to her until after Norman. But apparently Norman doesn't talk, and at some point he just loses his temper, and instead of the little jabs, he just goes nuts and kills him with the knife. So that's, again, that switch flipping where he loses his temper and he gets him. But there's actually 4 victims here because the neighbors show up because they have prearranged to meet the Brownes that day to drop their daughter off for babysitting. And that's when they encounter Rastus Russell, and that's when the shotgun comes into play.
Yeah, is this Miles and Thelma Crum?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, can you tell us what happened when they arrived?
Sure. Miles and Thelma Crum owned the small grocery store in Crystal Beach down on the corner, and they have arranged for the Brownes to watch their 8-month-old daughter, Judy, while they go swimming. Sundays are day off from the store. So it's about a half mile not even from the store. They drive up, they pull into the Brownes' yard right after Rastus Russell has killed Norman Browne, and he severely injured Anne Browne. So they're both tied spread eagle to their beds. Norman's dead, covered in a sheet. Blood's everywhere. Anne's unconscious. He's cut one of her wrists. He's beat her in the face with a shotgun. She's cut on different parts of her body, nearly severed her one pinky finger. And he's sitting on the porch with a shotgun in his lap. He still hasn't left. So he has not given up on finding the money yet. As he's sitting there, wondering what to do next, obviously thinking of what to do next, here come the Crums. They pull up in their Jeep. Miles Crum gets out. Miles Crum's no slouch himself. He's 31 years old. He's just got out of the military 2 years earlier. He's got his wife. She's carrying their baby. They go walking up to the front porch. It's a screened-in porch. And when they get up there, he sees this strange man standing there holding a shot-off shotgun with blood all over his shirt. Crumb opens the door and says, "What's going on here?" And Rastus points the gun at his face and says, "Get inside." Initially, Miles steps forward like he's going to obey, and then he makes a move, and he grabs the shotgun, and these guys both go tumbling to the ground in this death struggle for the shotgun, for the sawed-off shotgun. And Miles almost gets it away from him. He even tells the paper later, "I almost had it away from him, would have ended it right there." But he didn't. In the end, Russell pulls it away from him, drops back, drops to one knee, and as Crumb comes at him again, he shoots him right in the gut with the shotgun. Crumb stumbles back, collapses on the lawn. Thelma, his wife, goes running over to him. She's screaming. As she does, Russell comes out, points a shotgun at her face. As he does, she drops the baby, instinctively pushes the baby away from her, and the baby lands on the ground. He pulls the trigger and nothing happens. Either the gun jams or there's not another shell in the breech. So he grabs it by the stock and smashes her over the head with it, knocks her unconscious. Miles crawls back into the Jeep. He's holding his intestines inside as he does. He crawls up into the Jeep, starts it with one hand, looks up, and there's Rastus Russell standing right in front of him with the shotgun. So Miles slams the Jeep into gear and stomps on the gas, trying to run him over. What he doesn't realize is when Thelma dropped the baby, she dropped it right in front of the front tire of the Jeep. And he gasses the Jeep. Fortunately, in his haste, he has jammed the Jeep into reverse, and it goes flying backwards into the fence, hits it into gear again, and he drives off and heads down the road, leaving his injured wife and child there. Why he did that, it's hard to judge him. The guy's just been shot in the gut with a shotgun. Who knows? He's probably delirious. Probably doesn't even know what he's doing. He said later he thought they were dead. My guess is he's just reacting and he's not even thinking what he's doing.
Was there ever any moment where you were looking into Crumb as well and thinking that he might be part of some bigger conspiracy, or maybe he knew him or was in on some sort of robbery or something?
That's a good question, but I don't think the Crumbs were involved at all. I don't. I think they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And from anything I've uncovered, the Crumbs really had nothing to do with this. They were really innocent victims.
And what happened with baby Judy?
Well, that's a really sad part of the story, Tim. Baby Judy, initially, they thought that she had just some cuts and bruises. But the longer they kept her in the hospital, something wasn't right with her. They weren't sure if she had brain damage or she had a concussion or what. Eventually, she was allowed to go home, but she never quite recovered. She developed cerebral palsy. The people told me it was a result of that event. And she dies at age 6 from complications from her injuries. So she lives 5 more years and sadly passes away. So there was actually 2 murder victims that day and 3 that narrowly escaped.
I do want to get into the subsequent hunt for Rastus, but can we pull it back a little bit to his upbringing and maybe tendencies that he was exhibiting prior to this event?
His first 10 years of his life were spent in Thonotosassa, Florida, which is about 16 miles northeast of Tampa. And it's a very small rural community. His mother was a baker, and at the time, the bakers were a very prominent family in Thonotosassa. Her father was a dentist. One of her brothers grew up to be an attorney, a very high-level attorney, and there was other professional people in her family. So they had a name. They owned a lot of land in Thonotosassa. They were a very prestigious family. By what I could ascertain, Rastus Russell was born out of wedlock. And at the time, that's, it's kind of like a taboo thing, especially for a family like that. There's no father listed on Rastus Russell's birth certificate, only that he was from Kentucky. That's all it says, but there's no name. On the 1930 census, she lists herself as a widow, yet there's no record of her ever being married. Everything points to the fact that she was a single mother. Russell was born out of wedlock. One thing's for sure, he grew up without a father. She moves away from Thonotosassa at age 10, when he's age 10, to Palm Harbor, and that's where he grows up. By the age of 10, he's already starting to exhibit disturbing tendencies. He tortures small animals, cats and chickens, and he gets in fights with other boys, becomes a bully. They send him to the home for the feeble-minded, is what it's called back then, for kids. And they think there's something wrong with him. He spends about a year there and somehow ends up back home. And we don't know how or why, but he ends up back home. And he grows up in Palm Harbor. As a teenager, that's where he starts to build his reputation. When he's at this children's home, he gets his name Rastus. As a teenager, he grows up a troublemaker. He gets in a lot of fights. He becomes extremely overweight. He's known to eat these huge amounts. He wins hot dog eating contests and everything else. And as a teenager, he's like this big overweight kid that everybody makes fun of. And yet, at the same time, he's got a reputation as being a bully. They know who he is, but he doesn't really grow into this Adonis until he gets into his 20s. At the whole time, he's in and out of trouble with the law. He gets arrested for stealing cars. He gets arrested for burglary. He gets arrested for fighting, for assault. So the local police know him very well.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Back to August of 1949. What happened when he left?
What I put together was he returns back home where he lives, which is with a local family, the Crane family. It's Sam Crane and his wife. They have 6 children, and Russell is friends with 2 of the older brothers. So he gets to know Sam Crane that way. At this time, he is supposedly renting a room from Sam Crane. That's the story Sam Crane tells. It seems to go a lot deeper than that because Rastus Russell actually develops a relationship with Sam Crane's 16-year-old daughter, and they leave the state right about the time that Russell visited the Brownes 3 months earlier. Russell has this meeting with the Brownes. He leaves the state with Dorothy Jean Crane, which is Sam Crane's 16-year-old daughter, and they're gone for 3 months. Sam Crane reports her missing, kidnapped, takes out a warrant on Russell. But this would tie perfectly into if there was some type of heist that he left to do, and that's what they hired him to do. They're one of the last people he sees before he leaves the state, and they're one of the first people he sees when he gets back. So that really ties into he left to do something for them. Anyways, he takes the daughter with him. They come back to Crane's house about a week before the murder. And Crane just lets them in and they move back into the house. There's no, why did you kidnap my daughter? So the kidnapping story really doesn't fly with me. From everything I can see, she left willingly and Crane either accepted it or knew about it.
But he reported her, like it's actual fact that he reported her missing and kidnapped and knew that it was Rastus, right?
They didn't know his name was Rastus Russell. He went by the name of Jim Sullivan. He had a couple aliases he went by, yeah.
But he knew the person who he suspected he knew who did it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he knew.
Interesting.
The day of the murder, he returns back to the Crane's house because that's where he's staying. He walks right up to the front porch. Sam Crane and 2 of his sons are sitting on the front porch. Now, this is directly from one of the sons who told me this story. Day of the murder, Russell comes up on the porch, and he's sitting on the porch with his dad, and Russell comes up, puts his foot up on the front porch and leans his arm on his leg and starts a conversation. He starts talking. Sam's saying, hey, what'd you do today? blah, blah, blah. And he says, oh, I see you cut your hand. And Russell has this big cut going all the way down his hand. It's bleeding. And Russell says, oh, yeah, I slammed it in a car door. And that's what he tells his dad. He says he still remembers that. I remember that clearly, that cut on his hand, and him telling my dad that he shut it in a car door. So by all accounts, he goes back to the Crane's house. He has stolen a car the day before to go to the Browne's house. He's still driving the stolen car that day. He asked Sam Crane that night if he can take him back to Tampa to return this car to a friend. Well, he wants to get rid of the car because he knows that police might be looking for this car. Ann Brown got the license plate, which he's probably switched by now. So Sam Crane drives him all the way back to Tampa that night through roadblocks, because by this time they set roadblocks up all around Pinellas County. And when he gets there, he tells his story of he sees Russell. Russell just drops the car off in a parking lot there, right about where he stole it. And Sam Crane tells a story that he's loading groceries and everything else out of this car. This is stuff he stole from the Browne's house into his car, along with 2 shotguns. And he drives them all the way back, and they go to bed like nothing ever happened. So, if you saw somebody putting a sawed-off shotgun in the back of your trunk along with another shotgun, wouldn't you be kind of suspicious at that point, especially when you're dropping off a car in a parking lot? I mean, it's just...
My eyebrows would be raised a bit, yes.
Yeah, there's just so many. And then you get into the Cranes. Did they know he was doing these other crimes? Because before this, he's done a string of robberies too while he's living at their house. Do they know anything about this? Maybe. I don't know.
So how does he get caught?
The whole second half of the book is the chase. He gets caught the very next day, actually. Sam Crane wakes up the morning after this, and he picks up the newspaper. The whole front page is a story of this horrible murder that happened in Crystal Beach the day before, which is about 2 miles from their house. And Crane's reading it. He's drinking his coffee. And when they start describing the car and they start describing the sawed-off shotgun and the time frame, and Crane starts to put 2 and 2 together, and he remembers that shotgun from the night before. And he knows it's sitting up in Russell's room. So he calls his best friend, who's his boss, and he comes over and he says, look, I think this guy living in my house is the guy that did these murders. So they hatch this plan that they're going to find out. And they tell, his friend comes over and they tell Russell, oh, we're going to be measuring all the rooms because we want to do some improvements here and we need to get the measurements. That's to get in his room. They go in his room and they're acting like they're measuring everything, but they're looking around and they see the 2 shotguns. And then in the corner, they find a pile of bloody clothes. This guy doesn't even think to wash his clothes or throw them out or burn them. They're just there. And so they know at this point. Sam Crane doesn't want to call the police right away. His wife is pregnant. He's afraid if they raid the house, there could be a standoff. It could get violent. His wife could get upset. Something might happen to the baby. So instead, he hatches a plan that he's going to have his kids take Russell scalloping the Dunedin Flats, which is a little flat area of the bay here close by where they scallop. And it's shallow water. Once you're in it, it's hard to go anywhere really fast. And they do. They take him out. They go scalloping that afternoon. This is the day after the murders. And when they do, he calls police and says, I think I got your guy. And there is this huge swarm of police from around Central Florida. This is big news at this point. And they corner him in the Dunedin Flats. He's out there on the flats. He can't get away. They eventually go out after him with a boat. He tries to swim away, but they eventually catch up to him. And he's got 5 guns trained on him, and he gives up. And they bring him in, and that's where that iconic photo is of him coming ashore at Dunedin Flats, where he's got the handcuffs on and the police are all around him. All he's got on is a pair of swim trunks. And that was the photo that went nationwide. But that dock is still there. So it's a really cool place to get on and see that. But that's how they captured him the first time. They took him to the Pinellas County Jail, and that's where the second part of the story starts.
Yeah, he escapes, and then there's another chase.
Yeah, he escapes 3 weeks later. the day after a hurricane. The power's out, the phones are out. Russell knows this. One of the deputies is on vacation. Another one isn't working, and the other ones are busy out answering calls because there's no power. So they're out dealing with a lot of these things, down power lines, everything else. In their busyness, they leave one jailer to guard the jail, and he's new. He's only been on a job a few weeks. He's still learning the job. Russell knows each one of the jailers. He knows their weaknesses, and he knows this guy's a rookie. And a guy calls him up to bring an aspirin, and this guy ignores every single protocol, leaves doors unlocked behind him. Instead of putting it through the hatch, he opens the whole door to put the aspirin in. And when he does, Russell's waiting in there. Somehow he's got a piece of rebar that's been smuggled into him somehow that he's made a handle out of, and he just attacks this guard, and they fight all the way down the 3 flights of stairs to the bottom. Russell beats him almost senseless and gets up, runs out the jail, jumps the fence, and runs out through downtown Clearwater. And again, massive police response, over 100 officers. They're combing the streets of Clearwater. They call out the National Guard to seal off the outside of Clearwater. They're shooting star shells into the sky to light up the streets so they can see. I mean, they're terrified of this guy. The city's terrified of him, and they're doing everything to catch him. And somehow, still, he's bleeding. He's running through the streets. He cuts his hand on the fence as he's jumping it, so he's leaving a trail of blood through the streets of downtown Clearwater. And somehow he still manages to steal a truck and escape Clearwater, and gets outside, and he's out in the swamps of Palm Harbor now he's on the loose for 5 days.
Should we do a spoiler here, or is this a good way to just kind of leave people hanging and say, you got to get the book? I don't know. It's up to you. If you want to continue with the conclusion, or maybe we should leave it at a cliffhanger here.
Well, I think we can leave it at a cliffhanger. I had as much enjoyment writing this book as I hope people have by reading it, because as I'm writing it, I'm living the story. I'm like, I think Stephen King makes a comparison to when he's writing his books. He doesn't know what's going to happen next. He's following the story. And that's kind of what I felt like. I'm living the story. The feedback I've gotten from the book is once they start reading it, they can't put it down. And that's the best compliment an author can get. So I think I'll leave it as a cliffhanger, but I can tell you, the book does have a very conclusive and gratifying end, and I'll leave it at that.
For the listeners, the book does not leave it as a cliffhanger. You do get resolution. You do get a conclusion. So good work there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. Where do you tell folks to get your book?
You can get it at most major retailers. Actually, if you wait a couple more days, the audio book has just come out, so it will be up too. The audio is outstanding. We had a professional actor narrate it. George Newbern, he's on TV Scandal. He did the narration. It was done in an LA studio. The audio sounds like a movie. So if you like audiobooks, it's great. If you like to read, the book's great too. But the audio is also on all the other audio channels and major book retailers, Barnes & Noble, etc.